Welcome to my humble little office. My name is R. Keith Andrews. I am a spiritual guide and paranormal adept. It is time we take a look at the serious side effect of COVID-19. What is driving it? Where did it come from? Or more to the point, where is the possibility of where it came from? And just exactly how is fear pulling all of this together? So let's start with the obvious part. Mankind, I mentioned in a prior video that mankind has become, on the whole, addicted to money. That addiction has driven mankind to clear cut forests, to fracture the Earth's crust, and of course, the ongoing natural evolution of things has also added to the melting ice caps. All of this is releasing. All of it is releasing ancient viri that were, I believe the term is viri. I'm not sure if it's viri, virus, or viruses, but take it any way you will. Many ancient viri are being released into the atmosphere. Now, you can take all the conspiracies you desire, but the reality of it is this. This is the first time in recorded history, at least physically recorded, that all of the planet is actually dealing with the same thing. Virtually every country is looking at this, at COVID-19, as a pandemic. And yet, now, with a pandemic, let us understand that that means everybody, regardless of your religious alignment, regardless of your political affiliation, your gender, your age, your orientation, none of it matters, and your pocketbook is not doing you a bit of good. And yet, I see people that are theoretically very, very intelligent buying into some of the shall we, what I consider some of the silliest ideas, pointing fingers at other people, at other countries, and going, they're the cause. Take a look in the mirror. Are they any different than you are? Okay. Look at the way you're treating things, the way you're treating the people around you, the way you're treating the planet itself. Are you really any different than the people that you're pointing the fingers at? Now, I'm going to do my best to stay focused on exactly on how this all works. So let's start with the spiritual side, shall we? That being said, virtually everybody that is on this planet is human. Okay, now there are those of you out there that claim you are not. However, okay, whether you are human, whether you are something else, it doesn't matter. You're still on the planet, you're still susceptible to this. In case you hadn't noticed. Now, the funny part is that, and I use the term funny loosely, regardless of what you think as to how well protected you are, or it's not going to affect you, I have heard horror stories about people that thought they were immune to this. Okay, that figured they were protected by whatever, whether it was genetic makeup, whether it was their god, doesn't matter. Dozens and hundreds of thousands of people are infected. It really doesn't matter to me what numbers you look at. Okay, the reality is the numbers are not solid. Okay, people can talk about it, doesn't matter what your database is looking like. It is going to be virtually impossible to know for certain. And we're only talking numbers that are recorded. What about the people that are out there that are asymptomatic, and therefore nobody knows, themselves included, that there's a problem? So the spiritual side is this. Take whatever religious tome that you're following. Look at a current version of it. Compare that current version to the same Bible, the same religious tone, whatever. Take a look at that, the one that is produced recently, and look at the one that was printed 50 years ago. If there is one word that is not the same. Doesn't matter what the word is. If there is one word that is not the same, it is mistranslated. Okay, it is miscopied. Therefore, think back to the original, think back to kindergarten. You may or may not have tried this. Okay, when I was in kindergarten, we had this neat little test that was done, or experiment that was done. And that experiment was very simple. Take 20 kids, line them up in a straight line. The teacher would turn around, whisper a sentence into the ear of the first child. The object, take that child. That child then turns around, whispers the sentence into the ear of the next child. And that carries all the way down. Now try this for yourself, or think back to when you were a kid. Okay, even if you're running a major corporation, do this as just an oddball idea. Test it out. What you'll find is what comes out the far end, the far end of the line, is going to be radically different, in all likelihood, than what came out, what you started with. So be sure you write down the sentence to start with that you're going to start. The point being this: if you take that in any one of your groups of people, test it with your friends. Don't just take my word for it. Test it out. But we get back to the issue of the religious teachings. If one word in the religious tome that you're following is different, the message is not going to get out the same way. Now, I could go into further depth on that, but I'm not going to bother. The point being, everybody, as far as I'm aware, believes in something. Okay. Even people that say they don't, at some point, deep within them, they find they do. Okay. Now, there's, of course, those of you that are going to sit there and go, I don't believe in anything. I only believe in this one aspect. Have at her. Test out what I've just said anyway. Now, that's the spiritual side boils down to this. We're all on the same planet. The people, the plants, and the animals are all being affected. Whether you know them or don't, they're all being affected. Do your own research. Talk to people you know and trust. Don't just take my word for it. Look into it. The fact that you're listening to me says you've got access to technology. Okay. Now, that would be that's the spiritual side of it. And understand, all of this is tied together. Okay. Now, when we look at the emotional side, whether you're trying to protect yourself, whether you're trying to protect others, whether you're trying to protect your almighty dollar, okay, doesn't matter. Emotion comes into play. Now, the guiding factor behind this, in my opinion, you only have two emotions to deal with. You've got fear and you've got love. Fear will drive you to do all sorts of really bizarre things. Fear of loss, fear of station, fear of self. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can throw fear into. But it's all emotion. Okay. Use that emotional drive, whatever it is, to start working with the people around you. Now, the reality of it is, when you're dealing with a virus, if people are separated from each other, the virus can't jump to them. Unless, okay, the one change there is if it becomes truly airborne, then granted, physical proximity won't help a lot. But think of this. It has to have time to evolve. The reason for the separation, for keeping your distance from people is pretty simple. If the virus doesn't have time to spread, it doesn't have time to figure out how to mutate before it fades out. If it mutates, you've got a major problem. Now, whether you believe the numbers that are being laid out or not is irrelevant, at least from my end. The fact is, sooner or later, You know, they didn't really believe it was bad when the bubonic plague hit, when the Spanish flu hit. They didn't believe it was that bad either. Not until they looked back at it. Okay, so what you believe, do what you will with it. But the reality is, I'm cautioning you, if you choose to work with the people around you, regardless of who they are, you stand a much better chance of bringing this back into balance. Okay, all things do pass and we will get through this. There's no question there. But the emotion, whatever it is that is driving you from a feeling standpoint to do things, remember to follow karmic law. Be true to yourself. Do unto others as you desire them to do unto you. And energy out, energy in. Okay, and again, I'm going to back up a little here. Those three laws. Take a look at your religious teachings, whatever your spiritual guidance is. Take a look at whatever those commandments are or those rules of conduct and compare them to those three. You'll find, in all likelihood, I know with every one of the ones I've looked at, I found it, but you will likely find that all of those guidelines fit into those three. Again, it means we are all basically on the same page. Okay, now there is a staggering amount of fear out there. Okay, and I am watching people back up. Like when I talk to people, I'm hearing people really on a narrow viewpoint look at very small perspectives. Okay, now there's a game. Okay, there's a game called Jenga, if I recall correctly. Stack a pile of blocks up, and then you start pulling ones off the bottom. Those little pieces being pulled out will eventually topple it. Same problem. If you choose not to work with each other, sooner or later, all the fears that you're having, all the collapse that you're looking at, is likely to happen. Now, the scientific side of this, the logical side, okay, whether you believe the motivation behind it and what you think the motivation is doesn't matter. The reality is, it is easier to destroy something than it is to build it. So, what has to be happening, and since I am not one of the scientists working on this, I have to surmise that, like all other illnesses, if you take a survivor and you start working with their blood work, with their metabolic rate, you take a survivor from this, and there are a lot of survivors from COVID. If you take the fluid from a survivor and work with it, you'll find the antibodies built up in the system. That's where the scientists come in. Okay, that's where the medical professionals come in. They're the ones that are trained to be able to do this. Okay, now I can only surmise that that is the path they're going down right now because, quite frankly, I don't have real solid connections with them. That is where the scientists come in. Now, whether you believe what they're doing is because they're trying to control things or they're trying to save things, that's not for me to figure out for you. That's for you to ask. But ask yourself this. There are a lot of chemicals out there. There's a lot of weapons that have been built. Mankind it seems to be so caught up in the idea of what they can do to hurt each other. Let me ask you this. A lot of people are worried about the economy. Well, ask yourself this. You want to get the businesses open and running and everything full tilt and back so you can go and see your friends and what have you. How much fun are your friends going to be if they're dead? How many of your customers are going to come back if they're dead? And if a lot of them come back after they're dead, you're in trouble. Okay, so just a thought. But the biggest thing you have to look at is the logic of it. Okay, now all of these are tied together: the spiritual, the emotional, and the logical. Okay, the scientists are the ones that have the capacity And granted, a lot of them are tied to government, they're tied to private industry and what have you. Ask yourself, if you had the scientific ability to actually analyze the virus, would you would you personally be doing it for self gain, or would you be doing it to help other people? That's the question you have to ask yourself, or at least it's wise to ask yourself. Then we have the physical side of life. The physical side is this: as I said, a virus, like a fire, cannot spread if there's no one to spread it to. If there's no one to spread it to, it cannot mutate. Okay. I mean, technically it can, but the reality of it is that takes, as we've seen, as the scientists have discovered. Okay, and that's where you have to decide whether you're going to believe them. Evolution, as in cells mutating or viri mutating, take generations, they take millennia. Okay. But since people on the whole don't live millennia, we really don't have too much of a problem there. Now, the trees and the rocks do. Okay. And with you breaking open cutting down the trees, just clear cutting them, breaking the crust of the surface, that's where things are being released. Now, we can add to that little problem the issue of the amount of garbage that is being thrown on the ground. Now, I've mentioned this before to people that it does not, that one person throwing a candy wrapper on the ground doesn't amount to much. However, 1,000 people throwing a piece of plastic on the ground or a piece of garbage on the ground adds up pretty quick. This is the time to quite literally quit thinking and do your best to quit thinking in terms of who's doing what wrong, who's doing what for what reason, and work together. Because together you'll manage to pull through this. Every major setback, well, even that one, every major setback in human evolution has been overcome. People have gotten through it. Now I could list a whole pile of them. The biggest one would be COVID. Would be the Black Plague, the Black Death, bubonic plague from somewhere in about 1347, if I recall correctly. People lived through it. World War II came to a close. All the wars came to a close. Okay, all the major illnesses, even the Spanish flu way back in the early 1900s, came to a close. People came through it. The depression that hit after the Great War. And I do find that a fascinating concept, the Great War. I've yet to see any war that was great, but that's just personal opinion. All of these things people got through. Okay, but the way they got through it was together. Now, the reality of it is, the people that are sitting in government, the people that are your spiritual leaders, the ones that are your community leaders, the people that you look up to, every one of them is an individual. And let's face it, most of you are human whether you want to admit it or not. Okay, and that's a whole other ballgame, which we'll get to at a different time. But everybody on this planet is affected. Okay, whether we're talking people, whether we're talking plants, animals, doesn't matter. The entire globe is affected. Now, I tried telling people a long time ago that if they don't start working with each other and respecting the planet they're on, it will strike back and things will go sour. Well, welcome to the side effect of not paying attention. Okay, now I'm going to point out a couple of things that I heard that were remarkably, there's a term, there's a phrase out there called the Darwin Awards. Okay, which boils down to this: people doing really, really, really ill thought out things, thinking they were immune to it. Okay, now, I heard of one religious leader years ago that was so convinced that his his deity, his God, would protect him, that he told his entire community, "My God will stop a bullet from hitting me. I'm bulletproof." He had them all convinced. So they all gathered to watch him out in the city center, and he paid somebody to point a gun at his chest and pull the trigger, because he not only was he convinced, but because of his eloquent speaking, he had convinced his followers, his community, that he was bulletproof. So he stood in front of the guy. The guy pulled the trigger. Well, they buried the guy. They buried the one that claimed that his God would protect him. Recently, I just found out about a chap that was about another religious leader that claimed that, this whole COVID thing was all a conspiracy and his God would protect him. So he started busing people into his parish. And he had them convinced of the exact same thing, that their God would protect them. Well, the guy that spearheaded that recently died of COVID-19 complications. Okay, now, I'm not entirely certain if this is a good thing or a bad thing. You get to figure that out. My personal opinion is when people die, it's pretty much a bad thing. I do feel for the people left behind. Okay, but again, this boils down to this concept, and I hear it incredible numbers of times from adults and children alike. It won't happen to me. Okay, and the reality of it is, I can go back to my own childhood, and that I had a friend that everybody warned getting into the car with a drunk driver is a bad idea. Okay, way too many people die because of it. Okay, she had this idea, it won't happen to me. So she got into the car with a couple of drunk friends. We buried her. They lived. So take the idea of it won't happen to me and go, hopefully not, but let's not jump in front of a moving car and make sure of it. The fear that is driving people to point fingers at other people, it is clouding their minds. Okay. And when you start looking at it, there are a number of things that you have to really take into consideration. The power of the spoken word is, it can either be extremely uplifting, well, that was a bad word, extremely uplifting, or it can be absolutely devastating. The question here that you have to ask is, are you going to follow the uplifting side of it, or are you going to buy into the fear and look at who's doing what wrong? Now, if you're one of these people that is questioning what the government is up to, ask yourself this. First of all, understand they are people as well. They have their shortfalls. They are not perfect. I have yet to find somebody on this planet that is perfect. But ask yourself, if you were in their position and you knew the extreme of this situation, okay, would you want everybody knowing about it? Okay, would it be better to downplay the numbers or possibly balloon them? Take your pick. Which way is more effective or is safer for the general population? Okay, now I'm a firm believer that the numbers out there, regardless of where they come from, are not absolutely accurate, and quite frankly, how could they be? COVID-19 is asymptomatic, meaning you don't know if you've got it, I don't know if I've got it, but considering I've got nobody dying around me right now, I'm pretty safe, I've been in good shape. Okay, now, if you were in a leadership position, would you downplay the numbers so people were a little bit more relaxed, or would you blow the numbers up? Okay, in order to scare people into following what needs to be done to protect them, sort of, if you will, um, make it seem worse than it is to get them to do what is necessary? That is a critical question you have to ask yourself. It's the same as if you've got children. Okay, if you've got children, are you going to let the child do what he will until he gets hurt or worse, dead? Or are you going to do what you feel you can to guide him, whether that is by punishment, whether it is by fear, as in, if you do this, like I used to get a kick out of it when I was a child. My parents used to say, "Don't make a face like that; it'll freeze that way." Now that's using fear, okay? And I hear a lot of parents do the same thing. Looking back on it, it was kind of silly, but you know, the point being, which way would you rather it go? Okay, is there a difference? Ask yourself from a spiritual standpoint. Is there a difference between you and the person next to you that makes you better than they are, based on color, based on skin, based on society, based on their position in life? Is there something that when you really look at it actually makes you better, and therefore that COVID is going to ignore you? Okay, it is time to start looking at the similarities. In all fairness, it's long overdue time to look at the similarities between people, to start working together as a unit on this planet. You're all on the same planet, and in case you hadn't noticed, the air from Africa is going to get to northern Canada sooner or later. Okay, the air from China is going to get to the States. Okay, where you are on the planet is all linked. The water travels around the world. So if this virus it will survive in air, which it's already been stated it does, if it will survive in water, then obviously you can't stop those two. But we do know that close proximity enhances the idea that the virus can jump. It's very much like a forest fire. If the trees are all spread out, you don't get it spreading very fast. Okay, but that said, it is time to start looking at each other as equals. This is the first time in recorded history where everybody on the planet is affected by the same thing. So, now is the time to really take a step back and see the similarities between you and the people around you and start working together. I'm going to leave you with that thought for the time being because, well, I keep these short so you've got time. But please give my video a like and give it a like down below. There's all kinds of ways of contacting me listed in the description below. So do subscribe to my channel, okay, so that you can get all the information as it comes up. There's a lot of it yet to come. Until we talk again, take care of yourselves and each other, and for pity's sakes, stay positive.